Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first cast interview for Rings and Realms. We are delighted to be joined today by Ben Walker, who, of course, plays Gil-galad in the show. Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I didn't realize I'm the first. That makes the honor exponential. Thank you.
Gotta start with the king, man. Start with the king.
Right. King of the Elves.
Exactly. Well, I would love to just sort of hear from you. There's a lot of really big picture stuff happening with the Elves this season, of course. And, you know, as you're sort of preparing for the show, you're thinking through, you know, Gil-galad and his perspective on all these things. Tell me about the Elven Rings. Of course, there was a lot of discussion in the early episodes, especially a lot of doubt and uncertainty, and that moment especially in episode 1, where Gil-galad kind of turns, right, where Elrond sort of thinks he's going to be on his side, and then he ends up coming down on Galadriel's side. Tell me a little bit about sort of your own thoughts and you know, your kind of picture of Gil-galad's headspace there.
Well, I mean, I know Tolkien was resistant to this idea that the rings were a metaphor for anything other than the rings.
Right.
But in terms of thinking of it in the context of our show, you know, we remember that these are the elves that chose to stay, and you know, the Middle Earth is our baby, for want of a better term. And we're at the point where we're going to have to abandon it. You know, this hunk of rock, we know that as soon as we leave, is going to eat itself.
Right.
And that is a tragedy. And as the leader of the elves, I think he carries that disappointment and sadness. And at this point in the narrative in our show, I think he'll pretty much try anything if it gives that smallest grain of hope. And here come the rings. Here comes Ben Daniels.
Right.
I'm up there singing my heart out, and we're about to get on the boat. And in terms of what they could be, we don't know. They don't. And if there's the slightest possibility that they could bring about some good, we have to try it.
Yeah.
And it's this new technology. The thing I liken it to is, you know, they've discovered nuclear fission. It's that scene in Oppenheimer when he's talking to Einstein by the pond, and we could, you know, power all the homes in North America or incinerate the earth. I'm not really sure. And but if there's a chance that it can bring about peace and stability, we have to try it. So I think that's where we first see them.
Yeah, the parallel there is interesting. Yeah, I was going to say the parallel there is really interesting because there's the show seems to place a lot of emphasis, especially in those first 2 episodes, not just on like the particular properties of the rings themselves, even as much as just the fact that they have power. You know, it's more about like the general question of the usage of power and what the sudden exposure to power is going to do to people. And that seems to be one of the main dynamics, it seemed to me anyway, watching those first few episodes, as one of the things that they're talking about. So I'm thinking about the nuclear fission thing, right? I mean, it's an enormous power, and what are you going to do with it?
And how, you know, how power is wielded based on whose hands it's in.
Yes.
And I think they do that cleverly. I definitely think if we get too much into the muck of the recipes of the rings, that's, you know, a slippery slope into kind of another show, as opposed to these are lenses that augment the wearer. And in that sense, it is a bit vague, but I don't mind it.
It works. Yeah.
You know, we'll instead of vague, we'll call it mysterious.
There you go.
Well, I mean, to be honest, Tolkien was equally mysterious about the Rings of Power, especially the Elven Rings and what exactly they do. I mean, there's nowhere where he really just like lays out like, here's the nature of the Elven Rings, and here's exactly what properties they have. Like we don't really get that.
On the left hand, they heal flora and fauna.
Right.
On the right,
right.
It's
exactly. That's just what we don't get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it's new technology we don't understand, and the possibility that we can save Middle Earth in this kind of Hail Mary pass at the last moment.
Like a
Right.
hopeful innovation. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, exactly. And so the question I'm thinking, of course, here primarily of Elrond's concerns,
Right.
which are perfectly reasonable. You know, his concerns about the corruption. So I get thinking specifically about the concerns that Gil-galad was expressing and sharing with Elrond back in season 1 about the spread of darkness and even Galadriel's role in that earlier on. Is it your sense that it's just simply that question of like, well, yes, there's risk, but let's, it's the best chance we have, so let's take the risk?
I think so. I think also, that time is so flexible in the mind of an elf
Right.
that when you apply that, it's the same outcome. We leave and evil consumes Middle Earth. We stay,
Right.
we try the rings, they don't work, evil consumes Middle Earth. And
Right.
the latter has at least this slight possibility that we stay, we wear the rings, and it might work out, and it's worth the risk. Because ultimately, if we fail, the outcome is the same.
Right.
Also, he's not Elrond is not qualified to make this decision. I mean,
Right.
qualified in the eyes of the king at this moment.
Right.
And I think Gil-galad, I mean, what I gleaned from the literature is his awareness of the inevitable resurrection of evil. That this is, I've seen this happen before, and it will happen again. And here
Yes.
we are in the midst of it. We may have taken our eye off the ball for a moment, and it's gotten a bit ahead of us. And Galadriel certainly didn't help. But here we are, and we need help at this point.
Yes. Yes.
We're caught on the back foot. So
Right.
it's a calculated risk. And
Right.
I understand his concerns, but also because of the time constraints, we're not discussing this. I'm king, shush, give him to me.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And
Exactly.
and visually, I feel like we got to see that side of Gil-galad very strongly in this season so far, where, that relationship with Elrond has shifted in a certain respect. He's kind of rising up in confidence, but you're still in charge. So seeing that kind of dynamic shift as he's stepping into that role, it's been really neat to watch the relationship change between you and Elrond, while at the same time the progression, Gil-galad and Elrond, at the same time the progression of the rings affecting you and Galadriel, and that separation. So
Sure. And there, I like the metaphor of Gil-galad as a kind of loving parent, in that you give your children and people that depend on you space to make mistakes. But every once in a while, when there are zombies coming up the stairs, we're not discussing it. You get in here and you shush. You hide under the. But why, Daddy? No, you shush. We're not talking about it. You don't have time to explain the nuances of the danger that's lurking at the door. And this is one of those moments. But other times, I think, I mean, the king, he seems so prescient in the lore. He seems to kind of always be ahead of it. He's sending dispatches to Numenor, anticipating,
Yes.
the rise of evil and the necessity of unification. He's distrustful of Anatar in a way that no one else seems to be. He just kind of has a bit of his finger on the pulse of what's going on underneath things in Middle Earth. Right. And I think at this moment, it's fun as an actor, even though I don't necessarily have the text to support that, nor do I even know if the showrunners have the rights to those narratives. But it's nice to imagine that he senses something that at this moment he is not capable of articulating, but that you know that you just have to trust me on this.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Coming back to the rings for a moment, one of the things that I was really interested to think about, especially in episode 2 and a couple of the shots that we've gotten after that, like in the conversations between Gil-galad and his commanders, you know, the army commanders and things that we got later on, is about the relationship with the ring and how the relationship, how the ring is sort of affecting him or has changed him. One thing that I immediately noticed visually was, of course, you know, in the famous hand shot, right, with the three of you holding your hands in with the rings on.
Yeah,
Gil-galad has all the bling.
All the bling.
Yeah, exactly.
All the bling.
Yeah, but then I noticed that in episode 2, the next time we see Gil-galad, he's only wearing Vila, and all the other rings are gone, right? And that, I mean, it very subtly suggests that there's been some kind of a change, that his relationship with that, this is no longer just one of his rings anymore, right? This is now the only ring that he wears. So tell me more about your sense of that kind of ongoing relationship with Vila, with the ring.
Sure. Well, initially, and this was an idea that Kate Howley was kind enough to indulge. My original idea for Gil-galad was that he wore brass knuckles. This kind of almost like a glove. The ornate glove, and she said, well, we're not going to do that, but what I can do is and she assembled this collection of very ornate and beautiful, I mean, one is this in massive pearl, like something the Pope would wear, and you may have heard me talk about this, but then when he makes a fist, they kind of interlock into a kind of gnarly looking set of brass knuckles. And that's kind of his identity, because it's the duality of who we know him to be at that point. Sophisticated and present, but also with the potential to make a mess. And in defense of what he believes in. Whereas now that we introduce the rings, he's a different creature.
Yeah. And
I think as he starts to embody these visions and they start to permeate his existence and his life, again, to speak about his prescient nature, I think there's a part of him that senses the inevitability of what's coming, and in particular what's coming to him.
Right.
I don't know that he necessarily practically sees himself die and in the context in which he dies, but I do think he starts to feel the time ticking through the hourglass. And what's unique about him is that he embraces it. Yeah. That I'm sure it troubles and frightens him, but also excites and pacifies him in some way. He's a different elf. And so it's really great that you care about those details, because I do. And that, you know, the way that he existed has died, and now he's on the path, his ultimate path.
Right.
And having
it is in juxtaposition of kind of you know, by the time, I mean, I have no idea that we'll do this in the show, but by the time he then passes the ring to Elrond, he's nearing the end of his time as new elf. And as he's coming near the end of his time, you know, the next step is unification. And I like this about what the showrunners have done in the second season, is that in the first episode, we see Middle Earth is still okay. We don't fully understand what's going on, but we're not on fire yet.
Right.
By the last episode, Middle Earth is, you know, Region is in ashes. But as we stand on the precipice and lift the sword aloft, the elves are united. Whereas in the first episode, they're fighting like cats and dogs. And I'm like, you go to your room, you go to your room. And
They're jumping off cliffs and all kinds of things.
exactly. If I don't get to jump off something by the end of this series, I'm going to be ticked. Everybody just gets to jump off something, prove a point. But that's what's hopeful. That there's the rallying cry from the
Yes.
elves at large, but also that we stand united in our pursuit. But as his time wanes, unification grows.
Right.
That as he passes the ring, the gauntlet of the responsibility of Middle Earth is also passed.
Right.
And I like that continuity and the cyclical nature of Tolkien. That's just another little way, and
Yeah.
Gil-galad is part of it.
Well, it's really interesting to think about. Just going back to what you were saying about that decision point in episode 1, right, where Middle Earth is the baby, and is their baby, and if they know that if they have to leave, but at the same but there's kind of another dynamic there, right? It means that decision to stay. I'm thinking about what you were saying about this sort of sense that Gil-galad has that he's on a pathway, which is, if not certain, likely to lead to his death, to his own sacrifice. And so, of course, that means that another dynamic, a kind of a hidden dynamic in a sense, in that first scene, is him also turning down, going back to Valinor. Right?
Exactly.
I would rather stay here and do the Hail Mary, even though it might mean my death, than go back to Valinor, which would be good for them, sort of selfishly, perhaps. But
Sure, and I guess technically they've already done. This is a doubling down on an original decision, but I think, the first time there's a bit of elvish arrogance to it. We're going to be
Right.
gods on this little hunk of dirt, whereas this time we want to save something, partially
Right.
our investment in it, but also I think that their connection to it over these thousands of years has grown, that we really love it, and it would be mourning our place, our existence,
Right.
and who we've become.
Right. Right. Thinking about that in general, tell me more about Gil-galad's relationship with the tree in Linden. I've been thinking a lot about the tree in Linden over the course of both seasons, and trying to not just sort of understand the mechanics of it exactly, but I mean, it clearly has a symbolic significance. But at the same time, I've not been completely clear. On the one hand, it seems like a tie back to Valinor, right, and an echo of the trees of Valinor. But at the same time, it also seems clearly to be an important. I mean, it's also tied through its corruption and near death, right? It's tied also with the life of the elves in Middle Earth. So it seems to be kind of pointing both ways in this way. So I would love to hear more about kind of your understanding of Gil-galad's relationship with the tree.
Sure. Well, the way I've justified it for myself is, the idea that that if elves can create beauty, we can sustain peace. Through the reason we write the way that we write, the reason we dress the way that we dress, the music that we play, the food that we eat, how we greet each other, even the quality and nature of the weapons that we wield, they're all nuggets of light. And we accept that they ripple throughout Middle Earth. That Eregion, the fall of Eregion is not just, oh man, we lost that cool town. We lost the beacon of light that, from which the light of the Valar is reflected throughout Middle Earth. Thus, bolstering peace. And I think that is, for Gil-galad in particular, a sensation that he can feel it. And the tree in particular is a kind of barometer of how we're doing. And it's our connection, our literal connection to how we're rooted into Middle Earth. And as the soil is poisoned, this is where we see it become self-evident. It's the patch of mold in your drywall that starts to, I Gil-galad I just coming up with this metaphor, so go with me. But Gil-galad is the first one to walk in the room and go, "It smell funny to anybody else?"
Right.
That the evil is coming from within, and this is the first place we start to see it.
Yes.
And if we can glean from the illness of the tree, and if the tree dies, we can assume that the house is unsalvageable.
Right.
Right.
If we stay in here any longer, we'll have breathed the spores, and there's no hope for us. I'm actually really proud of that one.
I know, that was really good. It's a beautiful visual cue anyway, and then you just gave it all this import that.
Yeah, but that's how I think about it, that it is a kind of sensation that they can't and probably don't need to fully articulate, but that it's a barometer of how we're doing.
Yeah. No, those are both the moldy house and the barometer are both really interesting metaphors that kind of sort of suggest an interesting connection and approach there. Yeah.
And really effective on screen. It gives you this tool with which to play with and to show what's going on, understand that there's something bigger at play, but also has all this attachment to the lore that we can play with. It makes sense as the bridge between the two places, but is this really strong visual cue that you as king use, but also we as viewers can interpret as problematic. There's trouble in the house.
Yeah, and that all that we do and attempt to do, and one of the things that I love about Celebrimbor and what Charles Edwards does with it is that we are reflectors for the light of the Valar.
Right.
And,
yes.
Not unlike in Khazad-dûm, when the light, the path of the light is obstructed, we're plunged into darkness, and when that happens, things come out of the ground.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's great. Awesome. So one of the things that I know a lot of people have been kind of interested in and thinking about is essentially Gil-galad's role as king, like what exactly his leadership role is. There are some sort of differences between how the show seems to depict his kingship versus how the High Kingship is. Tolkien does not define it very clearly, but there are some differences I think that we can see there. But I would just be interested to hear you talk more. That was one of the things in Gil-galad's scenes from this season that I found really interesting. We see him interacting with his commanders. Like we see him not just kind of standing in a ceremonial role, not just speaking personally to Galadriel and Elrond, but we saw him actually like in administration, basically. So anyway, I'd just be interested to hear about your concept of essentially what it means to be king, what it means to be High King among the elves. Yeah,
it is odd. Was he a priest? Is he?
Was he voted?
Yeah, there is question about his lineage anyway.
Yes,
and we can get into that, but we'll get lots of comments online. But what I think is unique about his lineage is that it was kind of thrust upon him the time in which he was in his elvish adolescence, and then in the state of becoming, and then who looked after him. He had a surrogate father when he was sequestered, and in some ways he has become a surrogate father, what he would have lived through is just as important as who his daddy was on the family tree.
Yes.
And I also like that Tolkien never really, I guess Christopher made a full-blown decision about it, but that J.R. didn't. That it's
though Christopher doubted, second-guessed himself later.
Like 4 pages later, he was like, "Now, hang on a minute."
Yeah, way back.
Exactly.
But in terms of his role, well, it is also, you're grappling with the idea, the knowledge that, well, actually, Galadriel is older than I am and more experienced. Why am I dressing her down? Well, first off, he is where the buck stops. I
Right.
think that he is the 10th man, the one who has to actually take the responsibility, hear everyone out, and but ultimately he's the last call. And
Right.
that is the uniqueness of Elvish hierarchy, that in some ways everyone gets a voice, but not everyone gets a vote.
Mm-hmm.
And he's willing to hear everyone, but eventually, really, there's only one vote.
Right.
And that's his role, to be that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
uh, to
And
take on the
speaking of,
responsibility.
yeah, exactly. Speaking of hierarchy, one of the places we see that, like the question of actual leadership hierarchy, again, not just his relationship with particular people like Elrond, but is with Celebrimbor. And the question of, when Celebrimbor is like, am I not Lord of Eregion? Right? I can, and so he has authority, like he has real authority. He is the Lord of Eregion, as of course we see, Galadriel very sort of movingly insisting upon when she comes in and meets. They have their last meeting there in episode 7, right? So he has real authority in Eregion, and yet just as clearly is hierarchically subservient to Gil-galad. Do you have a clear sense of like what that relationship like between Gil-galad and Celebrimbor as Lord of Eregion, how like sort of the dynamics of that kind of work?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is I think the process of information and the role, that is your role and your role only.
Right.
That where Celebrimbor is manipulated into thinking, I like to think, um, uh, he makes a decision for Middle Earth under the
Right.
guise of I am Lord of Eregion. It's like, well, that qualifies you to make decisions about this, but not about all of us, which is
Right.
another distinction hierarchically. And also the control of the flow of information, which
Right.
I also understand is frustrating to Elrond in particular. It's like, you'll know when it's time for you to know. And it makes the king, I think, early on seem a bit Machiavellian and a bit politically aloof, to put it nicely. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that comes with the responsibility. You get the first answers, you get the first information, and then you get to choose how you disseminate it,
Hmm.
which is ultimately what kind of screws him up, because he
Right.
can't control the flow of information because the
Right.
mold is spread too far. Um, he's right in that he's the Lord of Eregion, but his responsibility is to uh, develop his craft, which
Hmm.
is universal craft. The like we spoke earlier, the expansion of the light and the beauty and the reflection of Valinor. But he doesn't have the responsibility for all of Elvendom and ultimately all of Middle Earth, as we're the protectors of them. Uh, it, I like also, like what Ismail's doing with the woodland elves. That is also under the purview of the king. He he
Yes.
he is aware, and it is his job to take and filter all the information. And Celebrimbor is misguided when he forgets that his information is filtered.
Right. Right.
That,
That's a
I
long-winded answer to your question, but
that's
no, no, no.
I hope
It's
it's clear.
Can you just see like
yeah.
our wheels turning as you talk though? I'm like, ooh, I've got a whole outline of questions now, but
Oh,
you go
great.
ahead.
Let's go. I could talk about this to the end of time.
I just love it, and it just makes me think so much about the world building that we talk about all the time with adaptation discussions. But it happens so much with an individual practice in production too. That I mean, if you're willing to talk a bit about process too, I'm so curious about how much of this conversation and thought process, which clearly informs your performance, goes into your community of performance and artists and technicians. Like, do you speak beforehand about the role of the High King so everyone in that world understands what your role is? Like, and I not just filmic role, but what the role of Gil-galad, the High King, is, so everyone's on the same page. historically, you know?
Sometimes. I can say that unlike a lot of jobs I've had, the majority of everyone who's involved in this one has the same goal, which is to serve the vision of Tolkien, and that we come at it as previous fans and fans that are enriched by having this job. And in some ways, like Lindsay Weber, our executive producer, she's the Gil-galad, and that every once in a while she has to control information. She has to make a potentially unpopular decision in the moment, but you don't understand that we're losing the light. She's going to get a union rep down there in about 2 seconds if we don't do a certain turnaround. You know, there are things at play that you don't understand. You may be the Lord of Region and you want another take, but the answer is no. Even
That's a beautiful metaphor.
And ultimately, what you also don't understand is that the buck stops there. If it doesn't go well, or someone gets hurt, or the show falls apart, or that's who's gonna ultimately have to deal with it. That's actually also a pretty good analogy. But yeah, I mean, there are a few of us that can't stop talking about it, and that are constantly discussing it. There are time constraints in a television show, and that sometimes you get the material in a manner in which you can't fully process it and have the levels of discussions that you wish you could have. Like for example, we didn't have time for a read through of some episodes. So those that were interested, and Charlotte, the director, she was interested. I was like, well, look, come on this Sunday. We just come sit in my living room. We're going to read it. We're going to have some discussions, trying to at least get on the same page in terms of our goals of how we see it. And it was really funny. I have this French bulldog, and he was kind of locked upstairs because he's loud. And we were reading, and I think one of the lines was, and the beast was born forth from the soul, and as that happened, the door swung open, and he kind of poked his head in. He's like, "You rang," but you sometimes have to take that, whether it's in your own time, whether it's on the phone, whether it is in the context of you and the showrunner sit down and have a discussion, whether it's over lunch, that we're constantly trying to connect and make sure we're all headed in the same direction. And largely, I think we've been able to do that in different capacities. But unfortunately, it is television, and we're making a film a month, and people have their own lives, and it's Tolkien, and we could stand on set and talk about it and never fully come to a consensus and never shoot it.
We're familiar with that. We're a little familiar with that.
But that's also what I love about it.
Totally.
I love reading it and discussing it. Don't tell my agent, almost as much as I love making it. It is a coup to have a job where they pay me to read the lore. But yeah, I think, and the more we do it, and the more we have to do, like now we're starting to cover some Second Age terrain, and there are some battles we're just going to lose. The fall of Regia, we're doing that now. Okay.
Right.
Okay, well, that's what we have to do. Let's figure out why that's good and what we can do with it.
Yeah.
And and there are times where, especially as the king, I go, what? Why? You mean he didn't see that coming? Are you what? This is the High King Gil-galad. But then you remember the Lindsay Weber analogy, and you say, well, this isn't called The Trials and Tribulations of High King Gil-galad. This is called The Rings of Power on Amazon Prime, and
right.
It is a collaborative process, and you're going to win some battles and lose some battles. And what's more Gil-galad than that?
Fair.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I trust everyone involved, and I trust their uh, affection for the material.
Right, right. Well, my last question is thinking about the relationship with Galadriel, as that's obviously, been in sort of things did not begin well with Gil-galad and
He's a
Galadriel.
terrible judge of character. Am I right?
Right.
I mean, just you keep missing, honey. I don't know what to tell you.
Right. I bet you were feeling a little bit smug on Gil-galad's behalf at the end of season 1.
I was pleasantly at the screening the other night when I mean, it's also fun. I get to about as close as anyone gets to telling an Elvish joke, and the kind of sarcastic nature of, "Oh man, you woke up." I enjoyed it when you were unconscious, and the level of laughter that received was really gratifying. Um, Sorry, but I interrupted your question. But the relationship with Galadriel, please.
Yeah, no, just thinking about the progress of that, and how, again, thinking especially of sort of the turning point in that moment in episode 1 of season 2, right, with the rings, right, when all of a sudden there's this kind of pivot, right, and Galadriel and Gil-galad find themselves sort of on the same side, where they had not been really seeing eye to eye through all of season 1, and then through, towards the end of season 2, right? As they're now again working together, though still not wholly. I just would be interested in hear your thoughts about Gil-galad's kind of ideas about Galadriel, beginning in a sense, as you said, with the recognition that she is sort of due respect. She is his senior, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's got the authority, but she's been around longer. Her perspective is longer and wider than his in that sense.
And also, in the context specifically of our show, her perspective is troubling, dangerous, but unique in that she has already faced Sauron in one of his forms. That
Yes.
She too is having visions that, in some ways, she understands a lot better than I do. Because she has a clearer context for it. It's like Elrond needs the space to fulfill his destiny, and in the eyes of the king, Galadriel needs the space to kind of work through some issues.
Right.
And he, in some ways, she can. In some ways, the issues win, but again, I look at it through the eyes of the king, and in the context of her, I think he senses her potential. I think he senses how invaluable she is, and there is a level of tolerance that it demands, literally, in that we know who she is, and whether or not it's specifically in our show, I know who she is from the literature. And that he has to afford her that. Narratively, I don't envy that the showrunners have so far to go. We have to start in some place where they are fallible and in a state of becoming, and that I don't know. It's in some ways it's interesting television to see semi-perfect creatures screw up. Like, I'll give you an example.
Right.
One that when I first read it, I went, "Oh, come on!" But especially with Charles Edwards' performance, I really like the fact that he can't remember his assistant's name.
Yes.
The elves can't remember. What do you mean he can't remember it? Like, he remembers the specifics of thousands of years.
Right.
The
Right.
recipes of alloys that will sadly die with his mind. But when you re-examine it and get over, well, this was my expectation because this is what I know from the books and what I imagined when I read them. What it is a testament to the power of this mystical gaslighting in which he finds himself. It's a testament to the evil where he's in the grips of, that something that seems so obvious. The eyes of the eagle are blind for a moment, and
Yes.
that actually that's pretty cool. Um,
Yes.
Something that we took for granted is failing us, and that's how troubling it is.
Right.
Yes.
Um, and and I think that also applies to the king and Galadriel's relationship, is that it's fraught because they
Hmm.
are, for all intents and purposes, equals, and in some ways she's superior, but she still has to respect the authority and the hierarchy of it, which is how she is fallible. Uh,
Yes.
had she respected it, even though she may have known better, if she'd just gotten on the damn boat, there's a huge case to be made that we wouldn't be in this situation. Now that's
Right.
some pretty boring television. That's one season of this show. So I'm very glad she jumped off, but
Right.
it it they need each other in that context. That the king often needs a little bit of pushing, he needs a little bit of focus, and she needs support.
Hmm.
And uh, it is her strength that gets in her way. And another reason I think it's a pretty savvy move that he allows her the freedom to go check on Celebrimbor, but Elrond's going to run the show. I mean, that's got to really chap. Like just like
Yeah.
a minute, but I think that's a pretty savvy move on his part.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
that
No, that makes a lot of
still
sense.
developing. I think it's going to be fraught for a long time, actually.
We got a long way to
I
go for that
suspect
arc.
Yeah,
so.
that
Well,
they are
especially
equally
since, I mean,
powerful, but have separate skills that are at times going to cause friction.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, even in the book, authority and power is Galadriel's big issue, right? I mean, that's the thing that she struggles with. Whether it's possibly being too interested in seizing power for herself, or I mean, it makes all the sense in the world that her relationship with the High King, whom, as you say, she would consider her junior in some sense. Like, yes, okay, yes, like you're the High King, and I totally respect the concept of High King, right? But come on now, like
Yeah. Well,
Gil-galad is a yeah.
Right.
I got asked a question the other day of how has your work in the show started to influence your daily life, me, Ben. And I was actually thinking about the relationship with Galadriel the other day when I was talking to my 7-year-old son. He, and I had this very similar sensation to one that I had reading episode 2, for example. My son was in his class at school, and he was standing with some kids that were talking, and he got in trouble because of his association with them. The teacher was struggling to kind of get the class to move to the next place, and he just kind of got lumped in. At which point he said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! I wasn't talking. They might have been talking, but I wasn't talking. I shouldn't be in trouble." At which point he got in trouble again. And it's that moment of, I hear you, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but did you help yourself in that moment? And I
Right.
had that. This is very Gil-galad right now, and I could feel resonances of the show as because Ben's first thought is, you know what? I'm gonna go. You shouldn't be in trouble. But actually, they they kind of ebb and flow. They flip flop on who's playing a better version of the long game. Usually, I think it's Gil-galad, but Galadriel is certainly a force to be reckoned with.
Hmm. Well, and that in itself, the concept actually of like a paternal metaphor for
Yeah, I
Gil-galad
do
in
like
his relationship, it's interesting.
and I don't I try not to talk about it too much on set because it can kind of sound condescending to your
Right.
fellow actors of like,
Fair.
"You're my children, and I will help guide you to be your
Yes.
full potential." But that's an oversimplification of the relationship. But
Yes.
but in terms of a loving parent, that kind of specific, um, you got yourself up in that tree. Let's see you get
Yeah.
yourself down. Which at the moment, as as having been the child, you feel a bit betrayed. I'm
Yeah.
frightened, I'm in fear. And it's that kind of stretching of your potential and working through the consequences of your own behavior that makes it a loving parent.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's how I mean it, not in the condescending, I know all the answers and you don't.
Of course.
But in
Yeah.
in the context of the show, um, did you help yourself? Is
Right.
applicable? Did that help you? Did that help us?
Yeah.
You may be right, but what is our ultimate goal? And that is to save Middle Earth. You may be right about the rings, but I'm the boss, give them here. We have to take that chance, and I don't have time to explain it to you. Uh, Loving parent. Um, okay, you've messed up repeatedly. You get to go, but you're going to have a chaperone, and the chaperone's going to piss you off. Loving parent.
Yeah, right.
That he, in some ways, I think he, like, for example, in the last episode, what do we do? Sword or the shield? I think the king knows. But it
Yeah.
is the exercise of asking the question at large that unifies the group. And that's what makes him a good leader and makes him a loving parent versus just a parent. That
Right.
he gives everyone the space to exist and be part, as opposed to on your feet, soldier,
Right.
sword is out, here we go.
Yep.
And it's one
Yes.
of the, we may have spoken about it the other night, but it is one of the things that I think the show does well, and that I think, particularly in the last scene, Charlotte and the editors and JD and Patrick have done well, is that the eruption of the battle cry comes before the sword's even up.
Yes.
He turns and addresses, the Avenge Elves, but the the potential is already there, and
Yes.
see them beaten, dejected, having suffered great loss, but raring to get back in the fight, and that's so much better than the scene in the movie where the coach comes out and, what are we going to do? We're going to get up. You're going to get up on your feet, and it's going to be great. As opposed to unlocking the potential of Middle Earth.
Yes.
Gil-galad should be a catalyst,
Yeah.
a shepherd, and I like that metaphor for him, in that he is easeful but calculated, and that takes us into, for example, how he wields Aglos. There's something kind of balletic to it, that once the motion starts, the momentum of it continues, and that it is violent, but there's an ease and an indifference to it, like a loving parent.
Yeah.
My life is your life. It doesn't mean he doesn't care. It doesn't mean that he doesn't feel passionately about it. But I think you need to see his experience in everything that he does.
Mhm.
And I think a good leader gives space for participation from all parties, as opposed to dictating which direction we go.
Right.
That was, talk about long-winded. Clearly, I love to talk about this, and I think about it all the time. And it's also exciting to talk to people who care about it and are, infinitely more well-read than I am. But also, I've just, I really enjoy talking about the show in press, but every once in a while, it's how you changed between season 1 and season 2, and like I can sum that up in 30 seconds, but this I could talk about ad nauseum.
Right.
This is where the fun is,
Well, and it still feels like scratching the surface, like, yeah, I mean, just that metaphor too. It's like, it's what you were saying about like being a loving parent is the same as the buck stops here. Like, you have to be in that leadership position. You're making those final decisions as the parent and the High King, but you are
You're
guiding them.
somebody else every time.
Yeah.
You can't please everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he accepts that. And I think there's a sadness to that.
Yeah.
There's loneliness. I think another fact that I love about Gil-galad is there's no mention of him ever having a partner. That he's orphaned, is reared out of the context of bloodline necessarily, and And then the closest connections in some ways he has are with a half elf and with a
Yep.
human.
Yeah.
That he's constantly trying to grasp at bringing together some semblance of a family. This is where I get like almost sad for him, and that by the end he's alone. And I think there's something beautiful about that in him, and that, heavy is the head that wears the crown, and that there is responsibility, but also there's, I think, a real loneliness to it. That's what I think
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. And it really does, as you mentioned, certainly the longest running relationship that we know that he has is with Elrond, right? Who is his second in command for a very, very long stretch of time, right? And that's certainly one of the things that I've been, since before the show launched, I've been really excited to see was the sort of the long-term development of the relationship between Gil-galad and Elrond. And I'm thinking in particular about the kind of parental metaphors that you were discussing. We can see that most explicitly, I think, in his, the way that he sort of takes Elrond aside and is clearly, kind of training him and instructing him in a much more, I think, explicitly paternal way than with certainly more than with Galadriel, for instance, or even with other people. Yeah.
Yeah. If anything, he's just corralling her.
Yeah.
What they do is, I guess, tighten the leash at times, like, and even then she's going to do what she's going to do. But I think that is correct, and I like that we're able to maintain something that may not directly come from the Lord, but that we can elaborate on and stays in the spirit of Tolkien and what I imagine he would have liked.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Ben, thanks so much for the conversation. I know, as Maggie said, it still feels like just scratching the surface. There's so much more that we could talk about. Hope to have you back again in a future time to talk about more as the story continues to develop. But really fun things happening, especially the sort of the momentum towards the end of the season in season 2 here with Gil-galad and his leadership. And it will be really interesting to see, as presumably we're going to be settling in for the war in Eriador in season 3, to see how that kind of goes.
Are we in Rivendell? I don't know. I can neither confirm. But we do know, what we do know is that they don't know, and that wherever they are is it is a necessity that it's a sanctuary. But then you get back to the showrunners and Lindsay Weber, like, I don't know what they have the rights for. Like who knows? And you have to defer to that and respect that. And then find the freedom within the structure of the world that you do have. And there's plenty of Tolkien to go around in that.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Definitely.
Well,
thank you so much, Ben.
Have me anytime. I love this. And
Careful.
No, really, I really do. And I really like, it's an honor to be part of the discussion, even if on Instagram you get messages from people that really don't agree. Like, great, this is great. You're passionate about it. The worst thing that could possibly happen is that you're indifferent. That you watch Rings of Power and go, okay, well, where do we order pizza? Those rings. How many rings does the king need? I mean, come on. At least it's sparking a debate, and ultimately, the biggest win for the show is that if people are either so frustrated or so elated and curious that they then go read the books for the first time.
Yeah, for sure. Wonderful. Well, thanks again, and we look forward to talking to you again sometime.
My pleasure. I look forward to it.